Creative Arts Alive series, episode 3. I'm very happy to have Mahesh Dattani and Michael Walling with all of us here today. I would like to introduce the series to all of you first. Arts Alive has been conceptualized to bring to you the journeys of all the artists, their work, and the times that we are going through. The second wave has hit us quite badly. Everyone is struggling, but it's arts that we feel is helping us sustain, is helping us keep some kind of sanity intact. So, what is it that the artists are going through? How have they managed? What are their feelings and thoughts? Arts Alive is an initiative to map the journey of the creators and the curators in times when mobility and gathering of people in a space has become subject to menace. Through this project, we propose to question the ways in which the arts community would adapt the indefinite new normal. This global health crisis has resulted in significant decrease of creative production and has made everyone reflect on restructuring methods of performing a performance, observing a performance, and receiving funds for the same. At this point, Project Arts Alive interrogates through a webinar series the dialogic intersection of different artistic mediums in the context of different disciplines used to create, curate performances and interventions. The series aims to study the process of transition to understand the persistent adaptation taken by the arts and cultural sector within India and globally. Focuses on mapping the journey of artists, art practices, and its impact on the community to observe and understand the pathways to recovery through arts. Arts Alive emphasizes on the vitality to engage in dialogue with art practitioners from all over the world and record their journeys as a retrospective point for the contemporaries and for the future artists and generations. This project is conceived as a year-long series with 2 webinars every month, summing up to 24 in a year. And today is the third episode of the series where two legendary artists and two of my favorite artists from the theatre world, Mahesh Dattani and Michael Walling, they come together to share their thoughts and experiences through time, space, and culture. Episode 1 started with Padma Shri Neelam Mansingh Chaudhary, my guru, who shared her journey of creating Black Box, the production, which was a physical production but was so filmed by Kabir Chaudhary later on for Rang Shankara. She shared her journey of how she happened to do it and what was her process of creating it with a lone actor, Vansh Bhardwaj. Episode 2 had music maestro Bhai Baldeep Singh Ji, who is a conservator, and he shared his journey of curating longest running Batted series, which is the virtual Batted series of more than 194 episodes now, mapping the journeys of more than 200 artists from all over the world, and each battle spans over more than 5 to 8 to 9 to 10 hours. Arts Alive envisions to create a significant archive and become an important document that would serve with technical, artistic, and strategic information to guide, connect, and create a community space for artists to sustain, grow, and remain a witness to the history of change in the world due to the pandemic. I welcome Mahesh, and I would take this moment to formally introduce both the artists. Mahesh is a very dear friend. That's his introduction. And he's a legendary playwright and director that India has. He has, in fact, filled up the huge vacuum in a beautiful manner, the vacuum that we have in terms of playwriting. Mahesh has 40 years of experience working in the theatre as a playwright, director, and actor. His plays are performed in many parts of the world, and I have personally witnessed some beautiful productions. His plays are, they have been translated in German, Japanese, Hindi, Gujarati, Nepali, Bengali, and many other languages. His popular works include Final Solutions, which won him the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1998. Dance Like a Man has been extensively performed in many countries, and it is one of our favorite production, one of my favorite production. The most notable production of Dance Like a Man is Lilith Dubé's, which runs for the last 20 years, reaching 1,000 performances very soon. Other works as a playwright include The Big Fat City, Where Did I Leave My Parda, another deeply moving production, Gohar, and snapshots of a fervid sunrise. Recently, he directed his own short play, Untouchable, for an international streaming platform starring Roshan Mathew, Jim Sarb, and Pooja Saroop. Mahesh Dattani has taught playwriting, directing, acting in universities abroad, most recently Columbia University and the University of Malaysia, and premier institutions such as National School of Drama, FTII, DSM, Madhya Pradesh School of Drama, etc. He lives in Mumbai City, and right now I think he is in Lokhandwala,
Close, Mud Island.
Mud Islands, and is the artistic director of Playpen Performing Arts Trust, a group dedicated to producing new theatre writings. Welcome, Mahesh, and we are really looking forward to hearing all about your journey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this.
Our pleasure. Michael Walling is the founder, director of, and he also likes to call himself the artistic director of Border Crossings, and he founded it in 1995. He studied history at Oxford University and subsequently trained at Trinity College, Dublin. He has directed numerous productions, winning awards for Two Gentlemen of Verona in the US and Paul and Virginie in Mauritius. He has directed most of Border Crossings productions, films, and festivals, and is responsible for the overall direction of the company. His productions elsewhere include The Europeans, Unicorn, Macbeth, Mauritius, The Tempest in India itself, Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, USA, The Great God Brown, Play with Cocaine, Beard Slay, Spoke Song, Sir Thomas More, and his operas include the ENO's workshop productions of Wagner's Ring Cycle at the Coliseum and the Barbican. The Handmaid's Tale, Toronto, The Magic Flute, The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, Così fan tutte sto opera, and Michael is a visiting professor in the Research Center for Multicultural and Intercultural Performance at Rose Bruford College. He has written the college theater studies modules on the social stage, Shakespeare, the designer, elements of the performance, post-colonial and Black theaters, and the critical audience. Productions for the college include I Am Europe, Egor Bolikav, and the others. Attempts on her life, hard times, and many more. His publications include pieces in New Theatre Quarterly, African Theatre, among others. He is also the chair of the board of the theatre company, Kandinsky. Welcome, Michael. What a pleasure it is.
A great pleasure to be here. Gosh, I'd forgotten about half of those productions you just mentioned. It's nice to be reminded of what you've done sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, true. When we have spent almost all of our lifetime doing this thing, and the reason we are sharing this with the audience because the series is about knowing your artists well, how they have, traveled through their lifetime and built their work, and It's a pleasure because Michael and Mahesh know each other very well, and they'll be sharing about their collaborations, their work, individual work, and what are their experience and thoughts during this time of pandemic. So over to both of you. I'm right here behind the curtain for any technical need. And Avanti, as you know, is very much there. So you can call out for us and we can keep it informal. Over to you, Michael. Over to you, Mahesh. Have a
Thank,
wonderful time chatting.
thanks,
Thank you all
Ramandeep.
so much. Mm. Okay, where do we begin? My
Yeah,
goodness.
it's always the beginning, right?
Yeah, it's the hardest bit is the exposition, isn't it? Whenever you're working on a play.
Absolutely.
And this particular improvised performance that the two of us have to do today, the
It,
exposition is going to be the tricky bit.
I know, I know. Well, that it reminds me of this Japanese sensei, a Buto dancer, in fact, a Buto master, who said about Jo Ha-kyu, and he said the beginning, the Jo, is when nothing is happening. And he said something very interesting. He said, when nothing happens, people are listening.
Well, isn't that the motto of the current moment?
Yeah.
I mean,
I know.
it's great that Ramanjit's asked us to do this today because, reflecting, listening is actually all we can do.
Yeah.
And that's very valuable. There is nothing happening. We've all had to stop. And thank goodness we've had to stop because we were all going bonkers, there
Yes.
was too much going on. And it's great that we've got times like this. And, the fact that this series of events is happening over a whole year is wonderful because
That's right.
it actually means we can ask, what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. When we were all busy doing our stuff, I mean, did we ever connect on a digital medium and have a seminar like this? No, we didn't.
Well, no, and you and I have known each other since the early 90s, but
That's-
actually, probably the first time we had a really in-depth conversation about the nature of our work and so on is the previous one of these and now.
Exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
great opportunity,
So,
I think.
yes. So I think that the saying that when nothing is happening, people are listening, I think it's also among us as artists that we're listening to each other a little more, in depth. And I think that's a positive thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to emerge from the other side of it, and we will emerge from the other side of it eventually. But the worst thing would be if we emerged and just went back to the same thing.
Oh,
And, where I'm sitting in London, that feels like a very, very imminent danger. I mean, and things are much, much more difficult in India at the moment. But we are now at the point where a lot of the population has been vaccinated. Things are opening up again, and it seems that the cases are not going up again. And so people are starting to do things again. And my dread is that actually they'll go back and do exactly what they were doing before, and no one will absorb what's been happening. And I do think theatre's got a big job to do in that respect, because it is, after all, the place where we come together and work things through together. And there's a need, isn't there, for the world to absorb what's been happening and to take on board this massive catastrophe. And we're not having time to mourn. We're not having we're not got the place to mourn. I don't know how it is with you, but we've had funerals with 5 people at them. That's been the limit. So the sense of what's hit us, I think, has to be really carefully dealt with, and the arts have a big job there.
That's true, and I think in a way, this moment has made everyone an artist, because
Yeah.
absorbing and reflecting was part of an artist's job. I mean, we sort of took in things before we sent it out again, and now everyone has this opportunity to absorb and reflect and create their own piece of art, whether it's a poem on the internet, or whether it's something more than that. But I think it's really going to make everyone an artist in the true sense of the word. They may not become professional artists, but I think I get the feeling that our audiences are going to grow in the future because of this luxury of time and introspection that everyone has at this time.
Yeah, it's also to do with redefining values, isn't it? Because, well, Heiner Müller famously said that if all the theatres were closed for a year, you'd soon find out what they were for. And that has actually happened.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what you say is absolutely true, that people have been discovering the genuine value of creativity, and that it's not just another job, and that it's not simply about you know, can we do this fantastically successful massive show with loads of lights all over it, but that actually what's happening in the theatre is a social and spiritual focus for a society, and a place of exchange and interchange. And you know, what you're saying about everyone becoming an artist, I think that is profoundly true. And I think it may well mean that what starts to happen in terms of our art form is that it actually gets much more interactive and dialogic, including with the audience. And I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know what we're going to have to do to achieve it. But I think what people are going to pine for is not finished product, you know, because you can get that with a film anyway, and you know, Netflix or something, we've all been absorbing that. But actually what they want is the imperfect, the unfinished, the space where they have agency, where you know, which is political as well as spiritual. People are needing to find themselves in a new way.
Yeah, well, I think theatre has always been dialogic, and I think that's the one thing that you have in the theatre, but you do not have in the cinema or television. But it's only now, as you say, that we're exercising that agency that all of us have when it comes to theatre, is that it is possible to have a dialogue, an inner dialogue, a more sort of palpable one as well. In the theater, and the post-theater experience of continuing with that. And I think because it gives you the comfort of looking at something in its specificity, and it sort of relaxes you. It sort of takes away the tension of having to explain oneself, or
Yeah.
to you know, to in some way come out socially with who you really are, your fears, your concerns, your you know, your admiration. And you can all do that so well through the power of the story. I think whether it's a performer or whether it's an audience, it's this specificity that the story offers that gives us so much opportunity to talk about ourselves without really putting our biography out there for judgment in many ways.
Yeah. Oh, you make me think of several things. Which one should we go with?
YouTube.
Well, what you're saying about not being too specific about autobiography, I think is very interesting, because there's been a sort of huge movement which I've felt myself rather out of step with over the last few years around, I suppose, identity politics, and things becoming more and more specifically autobiographical in the theatre. And yeah, I like watching quite a lot of this work, and I present work which I've not directed myself in the festivals and so on, which fits into that. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but at the same time, there seems to be this kind of sense that, you know, only African people are allowed to talk about Africa, only Chinese people are allowed to talk about China, or you know, only women are allowed to talk about gender, and so it goes on. And that seems to me to be actually quite dangerous and retrograde if we're, you know, pulling back and back and back towards, as you say, autobiography and individual experience. That surely what's exciting about theatre is its potential to take us into the other experience, the fact that, and you can do that both by watching someone tell a story, but also by making a story. And, you know, you imagine what it's like to be such and such. And of course you can talk to them and so on, but well, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think there's a bit of both because I don't think one can demerit the need for voices to be heard from its origin. Like
Absolutely.
I can fully appreciate it if a person of transgender says that only transgendered people should be allowed to play a transgender person, because it's a voice. We do not know the original voice, so we can't get into the artistic voice of transgender, which a cisgender person can easily create, because art is a construction, right? When men write about women or women write about men, and you know, straight people write about gay people or gay people write about straight people, it's all art. Art in the sense of being an artifice, and it is artificially constructed because that's the realm of story. But I think having opened this can of worms about autobiography, I think you know, one can't demerit that in a way that it doesn't belong. Yes, you know, as long as you know, with autobiography, I think the danger is that you get more. You're talking within yourself,
Yeah.
and I think the dialogue part of it may get a little shortchanged. But again, I think it's a process that you will, you know, what you have happening there in London is great, that you have African voices, female voices, you know, voices that are original, coming from the original source. I mean, you run a festival called Origins, which has been around ever since I've met you, I think, or
No idea that long.
okay. Well, it just seems like it's been forever, you
Well,
know.
it's about a decade, and of course, the title is related to exactly what we're talking about, and it is to do with the fact that the voices of the indigenous cultures, which are presented in that festival, are marginalized voices which have not been heard in the mainstream, and where, you know, the sort of imaginative projection we've been talking about actually really isn't available because people don't know, you know, and or they've been very, very drastically misrepresented. You know, the fact that native people from Turtle Island, what we call the American continent, are known as Indians is preposterous. But and so it goes on, you know. So I thought, you know, when we set up that festival, it seemed to be very important, firstly because nobody understood these cultures, but also because we need to understand them, because there are so many voices in the world which can offer kind of correctives to the overarching assumed narrative. And this, you know, this is back with why this moment is so important, because it's not just we have to be different, we've got to work out what we're going to do in the new dispensation. And, you know, so what we're trying to do with Origins at the moment, of course it's very difficult because we can't bring people and we can't be in theaters. What we're trying to do actually, as from next week, is to start working through a kind of narrative about what we've learned over that decade of festivals and how it affects our own ways of living here in the heinous colonial West. What do we actually have to do to deal with the climate crisis? What do we actually have to do to avoid further pandemics? And the answer is stop being imperial. You know, stop going around the world saying all this stuff is ours. Stop ripping all the resources out of the ground and going take, take, take. Have what the indigenous cultures tell us we need to do, which is a reciprocal relationship with the planet where we give back because of things that it gives to us.
Yes, unfortunately, imperialism has crossed borders. That I don't think it's now the privilege of the West alone.
Well,
Because
I'm delighted not to have a monopoly on corruption. You know?
well, the thing
Yeah,
is, like, it's mutated, it's variated, so you have so many forms of that playing
yeah,
out that
yeah.
it's endemic, it's pandemic, and I think politics at the root of it is about, well, power.
Mm.
And I think on any level you could see this sort of raising its head. And yes, okay. I mean, one can look at a healthy ecosystem where there is some kind of I don't know, an apex predator,
Mm.
if you will. But I think the more realistic and holistic approach would be that we all take turns at being the predator who reins in and not consumes, but somehow reins in what's happening. We can't deal away with structure completely, but I think whatever hierarchy that we do have, and we can limit it to the world of the theater as well. It has to have a fluidity. It can't have the rigidity of the old normal. That's
Absolutely.
that's what we discussed this at another talk some time back, that
Yeah.
which was specific on playwrights and directors and
Mhm.
actors, and the kind of old hierarchy that exists with the text on top, and then the director, and then the actors, and then so on and so forth. And that hierarchy has crumbled, or if it hasn't, it must crumble. That we're looking at patterns emerging of hierarchies that will last 15 seconds and then disappear, and then another one. I mean, even within a 10-minute conversation, there can be so much of movement, high and low and wide and backwards and forwards and things. And I think once we lose this sense of maybe it's a sense of the past, because hierarchy is to do more with memory. Because if I come to a rehearsal space saying I am the playwright, I wrote this play, right? So that's a memory which I'm bringing into a very valuable present space that offers creativity in the present.
Mm.
But I think if I leave that, the hierarchy is organic in the sense that somebody else, a designer may suddenly get on top, and then sometimes it's the writer, sometimes it's the director, sometimes it's the actor. And I think in this sort of three-dimensional sort of movement,
Mm.
we're going to make theater. That's what theater is about. It's about it can never be unidimensional.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Except maybe I'm not sure I quite like the idea of the hierarchy just shifting. I just like to think of it all as an equal space. And but I mean, I think we're
Yeah,
talking about
no,
potential.
I think I'm talking about a hierarchy for something to function,
Yeah, sure.
right? You do need it. I mean, one has to embrace the fact that culture, ever since civilization began, I mean, the first thing that came up is that who's the ape that everyone is going to follow, and who's the strong one and who's the weak one and stuff. And hopefully we've evolved so that the hierarchy is the primeval need for a hierarchy is more creative rather than political.
Well, it's also to do with responsibility, isn't it? I mean, when we were being introduced, there's this sort of rather terrifying list of, wrote this, directed that, as if there's some sort of power around the individual. But the truth is that, all of those pieces and projects were communally created, and actually it became more and more so, certainly in my case, as my career's gone on. And the direction for me has meant more and more a kind of resigning of responsibility, which you can only have when you have some sort of status. You can't say, I'm going to open this up to everyone, unless you've got the position to do that.
Yes,
So yes, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. So it's making sure that the responsibility goes with the power. I think,
which reminds me of your production of The Tempest in
yes. Yes. Well, that was the other way we could have gone earlier as well, when you were talking about different imperialisms, because coming to India and doing that production with you, and yes, I was the director, but I mean, you were so important in it, and Prakash Belavadi and Anjali Jay and so many people.
That's right.
And that was about, well, of course, the play is about someone attempting to give up power, not very well.
That's right. Yeah.
But he tried, and absolutely, that had to be the way that it worked, because it was a production happening in a context I did not know, for an audience I did not know. And so massive learning journey for me, and I hope therefore for others involved in it, because we started learning a lot along the road.
I think that's a perfect example of the shifting hierarchy. I mean, you came as a director, and you offered a space, a creative space, and you also offered your naivete.
I didn't have much choice.
I think it's hugely important for creativity, and I think I strongly believe in this. When I heard it in a Paula Vogel lecture, which I heard online, where she talked about Suzanne Langer's, from her book Feeling and Form, that every art movement goes through 3 stages of naivete, sophistication, and decadence. She said that naivety is just wonderful because nobody knows, and I think we're in that state of naivety right now where we don't know. And I think that's the first step towards creativity, because if you come with saying then you are either in the past or you are in the future outcome of what is to come. So yes, sophistication is important, but I think so is naivety.
Ramanjit's asking if we can give you some glimpses of the production. I'm afraid we haven't got any photos of it, Ramanjit, because it was a very long time ago, wasn't it? It was.
I know those were the bad old days when we didn't have digital cell phones. Things.
I've got a few sort of photos stuck in an album somewhere, and I don't know where it is.
Okay, but when you find it, do send them to me. Send a copy to me, because I don't have a single photograph of that production, which I think was, in many ways, it was a hugely important production. And it changed a lot of things for me as well, as to how I looked at Shakespeare, because it just opened up this whole world of possibilities, and how fluid and how non-hierarchical an interpretation of Shakespeare can be, because it's not like so sort of set in stone that okay, you do it this way and no other way. One line can offer 100 possibilities. I mean, people say one picture is worth 1,000 words, but I think if you look at Shakespeare, one word has 1,000 images in it.
Well, absolutely, and thank goodness. I'm sure that's why we're still doing him, because otherwise you'd be doing the same thing all the time. And any classic, I think, offers a mirror to the moment, doesn't it? You mentioned Oedipus earlier, and I was thinking that if ever there was a perfect COVID play, the play begins with the people arriving and saying there's been this appalling plague and something is obviously wrong. What do we do? Something's got to be got rid of, and it turns out, of course, it's the person in power. It's a really, really interesting play for the current moment. But what I've just said would have meant nothing 2 years ago. It would be a play about a man who slept with his mother. It's the classics change all the time.
Yes.
It's very interesting that you say it was an important production for you, and I'm very gratified by that. It was, of course, hugely important for me as well. And since we're meant to be talking about kind of concurrent journeys and so on, and for me, that was the moment that made me think that I wanted to create theatre that worked across cultures and across nations. And I'd been doing sort of a little bit of it before, and you saw the production of Romeo and Juliet in the States, but the States is not that different from Britain. Whereas coming to India, and and I will always be so grateful to you for the invitation, because then the dialogue that could happen through the medium of that production, it opened my eyes completely to the possibility of a theatre which started to embrace the fact that the world was global, and wasn't sort of pulling its horns in and asserting a particular cultural identity. And that's become more and more important in the intervening quarter century.
Yeah.
Now in Britain, we're completely pulling our horns in. So we don't want to be part of Europe. We don't want, any relationship with anybody. We're fine by ourselves, and we're British and we're marvelous. And it's disastrous. And so, our role as artists more and more is about opening up these conversations.
Right, right. I still remember your program note for The Tempest. I think you said that the world today is globally interactive like it has never been before. You may not remember that,
I
but
didn't.
yeah, and it was, you said that 25 years ago, and in the 25 years, it has become even more globally interactive than it was 25. So
Absolutely.
even the sort of resistance, like what you were talking about, Brexit, and we have our own version of resistance, this sort of creating an artificial environment of insularity that it's like India for Hindus. It's literally, I mean, nobody's talking about the elephant in the room, but that's what it was getting at. Thank God that, Bengal had some good sense, and we have states like Kerala, which are very highly educated states, and they know better. But I think this sort of resistance to the fact that we are that entire concept of purity, which we seek in India, which you seek in Britain, which people seek in the US, and I'm sure in Africa, in all parts of the world, that concept has been challenged. That there is no such thing as purity in race, purity in terms of culture, because we've cross-pollinated so much now that what is British and what is Indian. I mean, you could have an argument about that and not reach a conclusion, because those identities have become so crystallized and so much of the past that they don't make any sense anymore. They just don't. So I think these are exciting times, and I'm sorry that it took a virus for us to sort of have this conversation. And the tragedy, of course, is immense, that lives are lost and professions are lost, and more people are getting into the poverty, below the poverty line and things. But I have a feeling that something new will emerge from this, and theatre and other art forms like theatre are going to lead the way, as always.
Of course, the other thing it's accentuating is the way in which the contemporary world is globalized, but is also incredibly localized. And the lockdowns and so on are making us think, yes, about something happening globally, but also really it's about what's happening on your doorstep and just down the road. And the fact that we can't go flying around the planet at the moment, and probably should do less of it anyway because of the effect that's having on the climate, it means that having these kind of electronic interconnections around the planet gives us one community, but there is also the other one which is very, very close to you. And I'm really interested in that in terms of theatre. Because of course theatre is always local in some ways. I mean, even if it's touring into lots of little towns, you
I,
know.
I really don't think global and local are polarities.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
Mm.
I think global is about reaching out,
Yes.
right? So yes, I am doing something locally, and theater is local, completely local. But I think the minute you reach out, and I think that's what makes it global. That I could sit here in Mumbai on Mud Island and reach out and tell you what I had for lunch, and the pasta I made, or the chai I had an hour ago. The fact that I could reach out and share that with you, that's what is global. And I think you're right that as we progression would mean that we identify and value what is immediately available to us. There will be movements where products will be resourced within 5 kilometers from where you are, and your art form and everything is going to create this micro ecosystem. But what's global is the fact that you sitting in London will be aware of what's going on, and vice versa. And I think that is the kind of global interaction that we're talking. That's why it is so important for me to travel and see theater in Bali, or in the UK, or in the US, because I feel that it's reaching out to me, and it's coming across as something that I do in another country. It is reaching across. Like just last week in Munich, they had a small reading of Dance Like a Man in German. Right, and it was an interracial cast. That one couple were, European German, and the younger couple were brown German. They were Indians, Germans of Indian origin, and I thought that was wonderful, because it just sort of opened the text out, and yet it's such a local text. It's talking about Bharatanatyam dancers. Even if you did the play in Bombay, South Bombay, it is global in that sense, because it's so far removed from the South Bombay experience that it can come across as something. Oh, this is something from South. In so many ways, it is about sort of being confident of one's identity and locality. And I think location is very important. And so which would mean that if you have a location, then it is possible to translocate. And I think it's that kind of transitive communication which then becomes valuable. But it can only work if you have something that you're located somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it, that as we're talking, we're thinking really about an absolute rootedness in something specific, in something concrete, in something immediate and local, and we're also talking about global connections. The bit we both seem to have a problem with is the thing in between, the kind of nation state, which actually is in most cultural consciousness the kind of primary identifier, but it seems to me that that's what's had its day. And if there were a way in which somehow we could theatrically explode the nation state and just be connected globally and locally, everything would be I think it's a much better social and cultural model.
Right.
God knows how we're going to get there, but that's
well, I think the Doctors Beyond Borders is a great model to follow. That they're doing something very important, is that they're addressing humanity in crisis
Yeah.
as far as health is concerned, right? And I think it's a beautiful, first of all, it's a lovely title. I can't pronounce it in French, so I'm
Les
not
chansons frontières.
there. Thank you. Well, what would you say for Theatre Beyond Borders then?
Théâtre sans frontières.
There you go. Okay, that's what we need.
Well, but also, of course, my company is called Border Crossings. You know, this is what we do, and you know, all the plays that we make, and I think it has become more and more about making them. Their collaborations internationally, and you know, The Tempest really was the beginning of that. The sense that our locality and your locality connecting globally. You know, it's very interesting that you talk about this in terms of Médecins Sans Frontières, because you know, there's a healing role, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But there is a difference. Yes, border crossings is hugely important, but it implies that there are borders to cross.
Absolutely, yes.
The model I said, it's doctors without medicine
Without
without
borders.
borders, right? So if you remove the border and you just had crossings, that's where we'll come to the utopian stage that you said, that how wonderful it would be if we didn't have these artificial sort of boundaries. I mean,
Well,
it's ridiculous having a boundary between Pakistan and India. I mean,
well, that's our fault, I'm afraid. It's the British messing it up. And we've just had 100 years since the creation of Northern Ireland. I mean, that border in the island of Ireland, which is now causing so much tension because of Brexit. Yeah, it's all insane. But therefore, the reason, you know, that their dream is Doctors Without Borders, and our dream is, we're called Border Crossings. It's because we're very aware that the theatre also has to operate from the situation it is in. You know,
absolutely, it's
utopian
wonderful.
theatre is very undramatic. You know.
Yeah. No, I love the title. I think it's
Yeah,
absolutely true, and one has to be true to one's times, right? We're talking about an idealistic situation, the ideal situation. It's what you said. I mean, I picked it up from what you said. You said that wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have, you know, these
yeah.
boundaries? So who knows? 25 years from now, border crossings might just be crossings.
Yeah. Or might be completely redundant. You know, I mean, I think very often your job as a sort of utopian thinking artist is to make yourself redundant, isn't it? It's,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great that it is redundant, because it's then reached its point of decadence and something new is going to emerge.
has to come in. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
Go.
yeah, well, I was just thinking, do you want to share some of those lovely pictures you have? Because
Yeah, why not?
because I think Ramanjit is also keen that we
Have a
we
look at some images.
people see a little more than just our beautiful faces.
Well, I can sympathise with that. Why don't we have a little look at this is a show we worked on together, isn't it? Reorientation.
Orientations, of course.
Yeah. Why don't we look at that for a minute?
Yes.
This gives a picture of it. For those of you listening, this was a piece which Mahesh was dramaturg and I was director on, and we devised it through a series of workshops in Shanghai. And it had actors from India, it had actors from Britain and from Sweden, actors from China, and a choreographic team who were from France, but one of them was Brazilian and one was German. So it was a pretty eclectic mixture. This happened, of course, when Britain was still part of the European Union, so it was under European Union funding, and there's no way we would have got this kind of level of support that was needed to do something on this scale, you know, outside of major funders like that. I love this picture. This was a sort of dream sequence that happened towards the end of the first half of the play. at least in this iteration, because it went through many different forms and grew and changed. It was never sort of set. But the one of the characters has arrived in her hotel room in Shanghai, and she starts to think, as you do when you arrive in a room by yourself and you're a long way from anywhere, and many other strands of the play all just come into the same space, which is one of those lovely things that theatre can do, where it starts to make the invisible, the imagination, visible and palpable and physically present. So, well, there's your friend Spatica doing her a scene from much earlier in the play where she'd been interviewing that same character Marie, and Marie's just remembering having done that interview. And
Oh, yeah, yeah. I remember she did this amazing job with the woman on the plane with the baby who just wouldn't stop talking. Was that in the final?
yeah, there it is, you see.
Yeah. There you go. Yes, yes, there it is. Yeah, I love this. I love this. And Michael, the ending, the one where the Chinese character has this ritual at the graveyard, and it ends with her dancing at her mother's grave.
That's disorientation.
That's disorientation.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well,
I'm completely disoriented now.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The ending of Reorientation sort of replayed it a bit, because you can see here the two Chinese characters and the English character are talking about how you mourn. And this was a sort of comic replay of it, that what do you do at the graveside? Well, we have to do these extreme displays of grief. It's interesting that in thinking about what we were saying earlier about theatre and the need for mourning to happen after the pandemic, or in response to what we've all been going through, a lot of the plays, well, which you write as well, actually, include this sense of mourning as something that happens on a stage, that the theatre can become a kind of place of collective mourning. And this, oddly, was a very funny scene, particularly when we played it in China and people understood all the nuances. But it's very much a scene about the need to get it out of your system. And that ritual being played out on the stage is not dissimilar from it being played out in your own life.
Yes, absolutely. Because I remember I had a similar kind of theme with Blood Wedding when I did Blood Wedding in the US with Indian actors. Avanti, do you mind showing some of those pictures from Blood Wedding? And as you know, Lorca's play ends with the women keening for the loss of their husband and her son. And it was very interesting because the play ends with the women keening, right? And the runaway bride asking for permission to join the ritual of keening, which the son's mother denies her. That's one thing I'm not going to allow you to do. So I had these wonderful set of actors. We decided to sort of do the keening in silence, so we didn't hear the scream. But we had the beating of the chest and everything in slow motion, and the mother singing a lullaby. And I remember every time we rehearsed that, the actors would actually just break down. The actor who was there it is. This is one of the. This was at the tech rehearsal. It's not the show, clearly, because you wouldn't see my ugly back. Yes. Oh, this was amazing because as you know, death is such an important figure in the final act, and I had this lovely actor Gayatri who had this sort of Daphnis robe, which she covered the stage entirely at the end, and then reveals the dead bodies. And we used a lot of red
You see, yeah.
Yeah, you could see that. Yeah. Well, I think, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Sabanti. This is
That's the
the
key thing, is it?
beginning. This is the one
Yeah,
I wanted to show you. Uh,
yeah,
it's the one where she decides to mourn as a kind of letting go, because that's the whole idea of the ritual. And so much of orientations and reorientation is about mourning,
yeah.
right? And there's such a huge difference in cultures that the fact that, ritualistic mourning, I'm not sure that's something that exists in English culture. That
Well, in a funny sort of way, but it's sort of, oh, he was a good man. Do you want a cucumber sandwich? It's,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
and
yes.
it's a ritual. It's just not a very good one.
Okay, yeah. So it's well, let's say it's subtle.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So, but that was something working with you on reorientations. It was very clear that there were all these cultural. That this was a major one because I could relate to the Chinese
yeah,
sort of need for ritualistic mourning because we have it in India too,
yeah,
right? And so I thought that was such a beautiful development where there's all that grief bottled up in so many of the characters,
yeah, yeah,
both the Chinese, Indian, all of them, Chinese, Indian, the Indian guy who lost his family in the tsunami. I mean,
yes,
he mourns in his grief, in his dreams, right?
yeah,
Because that's when he conjures up those images of running away from the tsunami and not being able to save his family and
yeah,
stuff. But it's in a dream state that he can grieve and mourn, and the whole sort of having lost a child and or missing daughter,
yeah.
and the kind of not wanting to share that with anyone. I thought that was deeply profound, and in spite of all the, I mean, maybe because of the humor and the comedy and
Yeah.
things, it sort of we got the levity, gave us the gravity of the theme.
Well, I think so, and it's interesting to talk about it again now, full 10 years later. I actually had an email from someone the other day who had seen it, and I'd never met this person, and she just said this was one of the best shows I have ever seen, and it was extraordinary because I'd kind of forgotten all about it, and but then talking to you about it today and seeing this image, just having looked at reorientations, I think there is something profoundly important about these plays which allow us to process grief, because we've got worse and worse at doing it in our own lives, and particularly grief for the future. The fact that this is a play about the death of a young person in reorientations and so on. It's all about the loss of children, and that's, the more I think about it, the more I think that really speaks to the current moment. And we were probably, as we made those plays, picking up on something which we weren't consciously aware of yet. But the fact that our generation is responsible for destroying the future, and that actually that's something which we can't carry to our graves not acknowledging. We have a responsibility to say we have really messed up the planet, and we grieve for the future, and that will in some way exonerate us, I think, if we can actually go through that.
That's so profound. Maybe this recurring theme in our work of the loss of a child, because I wrote Dance Like a Man 10 years before I met
I
you.
know. Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
And it's there, it's
yeah,
there in my film Morning Raga, it's there. So maybe it's very interesting what you say. Maybe it's a metaphor for grieving for the future, as you say. Maybe the child we're losing is the future. It's I'm sure it's a metaphor that can play out in different ways. But I think you're right. It's very important to acknowledge and embrace the fact that we have lost, and some of it was a choice when it comes to environment and war and communalism, racism, whatever. These are all grievances that we actually exercise out of choice, and hence we must embrace that fact and maybe even apologize. You know what Greta Thunberg, when she started off, I mean, her message to the UN, I mean, every second line was, "How dare you?
How dare you? Yes.
How dare you?" Yeah, and even now, sometimes when I'm using too much plastic, I just hear Greta's voice saying, "How dare you?" So yeah.
And this has implications for theatre making too, doesn't it? I went in the days before lockdown when there were theatres. I went to see this show at the Barbican, and it was enormous. This massive international touring piece, the Roman Tragedies. I loved it. I thought it was one of the most extraordinary days, because it was really long, I ever spent in the theatre. But they had like 40 actors on tour internationally, and probably the same number of technicians, and there was so much light and so much electricity, and there were screens everywhere. And there was a bit of me that was just thinking, oh my God, we're looking at hell, aren't we? This is actually how you destroy the planet, is by using up so much energy and by having so many people on the move all the time. And actually, we have to scale that back, and we've got to recognize that the theatre also has this responsibility, and that because our role is to do with shifting people's dreams, let's do that morally. Let's find a way of addressing all those themes, but do it sustainably.
Right. And we don't need it. We don't need it. We don't need all that paraphernalia to make our theater powerful. In fact, it takes away from those things. It reminds me of this very funny but very, very true anecdote connected to what you're saying. Is that in Portland, the Portland, the Arlene Schnitzer Hall, which is this fancy schmancy 1,000-seater thing. And a musician friend of mine, while we were walking past it, said, it was very strange when they had a musical playing there, like Me and My Girl, right? They had these enormous trucks coming in and unloading sets, and there were all these costumes, and there were all these things that were being loaded, and they had like 5 days of technical rehearsals and things. And after they struck the set, the next on the season was Zakir Hussain playing on the tabla. And he said it was very interesting to see this man get out of the taxi with his little box that had his tablas and going in there. And that's it. And he said, and it was far more magical. That evening at the Arlene Schnitzer was far more magical, right? Ramanjit has said something. Sunil Bhandari is an artist, an inert observer, and not an activist. Sorry, that's a message from Sunil Bhandari. Is an artist, an inert observer, or not an activist at all? Do you want to take that question, Michael?
All right. No is the answer, I think. No, I think we're very much activists. If you simply, even the act of observation is an act. Just by watching what's happening in the world and replaying that, reflecting it back to the world, that is an action, because inevitably what you reflect back, you inflect, you offer some kind of reading of it. You choose what it is that you reflect back. We're constantly bombarded by so much stuff all the time, every day. You, Sunil, as you're looking at this picture of me now, you can see hundreds and hundreds of books behind me. You can see a cushion cover over there. You occasionally see this bottle of water. I hope you're filtering them all out. I hope what you're doing is listening to what I'm saying, because that's the main thing about this. But that is actually your choice. in this observation of the world. And so something active is happening even in that, which is that you're interpreting what's the most important thing in the picture. And so necessarily artistic activity, even if it just purports to be reproducing reality, is actually deeply selective, deeply manipulative, if you like, and therefore activist, because it's reflecting a view on the world, and that tends to mean some kind of moral agenda. And once you acknowledge that, then you embrace its inevitability, and it means that you can be more conscious, more critical, more aware of how you're reflecting things back, which means that you can use your art to propagate an agenda, or you can be aware of the moral responsibility that comes with that act of reflection. I think that's the way I'd like to put it. Do you want to add anything, Mahesh, or disagree with me fundamentally?
No. I think it's in fact, I would like, Sunil, apologies if I tweak your question a little bit. And what if I threw the question, is an activist an artist? Right? And I would say yes, because both artists and activists raise empathies, right? So there are common grounds. I don't think all of us, whatever your profession, you could be a chartered accountant and be an artist. I think this entire exclusive notion of who an artist is what I would like to challenge, because like we said, if we're looking at the concept of purity being an artificial one, I think who is an artist is also, I think all the entire human race, we're all artists. It's just that some of us choose to spend more time being artists. So I think that's a question which can be raised very often, and you can have different answers to that. We have more questions coming in from Neil Thomas. What if the child that has died is hope?
Okay.
Oh, that's deeply tragic.
It is deeply tragic. I think I don't think hope ever quite dies, though. Do you, Mahesh? The Cornell West is very good on this. The difference between hope and optimism. And optimism is very shallow. It's what kind of clueless people in denial have every day. Oh yeah, it's all fine. Hope is the opposite. Hope is actually what you still have even after the child has died. Hope's that little bit of humanity that remains somewhere very, very deep inside us, and which we cling on to when there is no expectation of things getting better. Hope has been terribly important over the last year. The sense that actually we do have something which holds us together. We do have something that's very, very tender, right at the heart of our being. If hope dies, then the planet does die and humanity dies, and I don't think that's happening. So I hope the answer to your question is no, Neil, and the fact I say I hope it suggests that hope has not died, at least here. What do you think, Mahesh?
Well, I think even if the child is gone, like what you said, that we're talking about grieving, we're looking at a sense of loss, right? And that can only come if there is hope, right? If we don't care about the loss of the child, then yes, the planet has already died, but we do care, and it does affect us, no matter how much we try to hide it. That any sense of loss is always followed by hope, even in the grieving, even in the acknowledgement of the loss, because what you're acknowledging is the beauty of the presence of what is lost now. So I think it's a wonderful question, and of course I'm reminded of the famous line from, I think it's Emily Dickinson, hope is the thing with feathers. that I've forgotten the rest. But yes, it's something that's fluttering around all the time, and I think that's what makes gives beauty, a sense of beauty to our lives, no matter what, whether it's tragedy or comedy or drama or whatever. It's that sense of beauty.
There was a brilliant Irish play, which was an adaptation of a book called Grief is the Thing with Feathers.
Oh,
Shifting the Emily Dickinson line a little bit, and it's the story of a man whose wife has died, and he's left alone with two little boys, and the crow from Ted Hughes's poems about the crow turns up and embodies the grief. And the play version of this, the father and the crow were played by the same actor, the extraordinary actor Cillian Murphy. And this feeling that grief somehow becoming this completely animalistic, feathered, theatrical being was quite wonderful, because it meant you could watch physically the journey of grief. And these things are journeys. There is a drama, it plays through, and actually we do emerge from the other side, and we emerge massively different. This is what we were saying right at the start, is after this time we will not go back to normal, because we just won't be the same. You pass through something, and theatre's this play was extraordinary, and theatre is very, very good at offering an image of passage, because it is like our lives. It's happening in front of us in real time. You don't emerge quite the same having seen the play as you go into it.
that's true. It reminds me of the of Angels in America.
Oh yeah, yes, yes, absolutely, yeah.
So I mean, there's death, there's despair, there is complete what appears to be hopelessness, and then this angel descends. And I think this whole, I'm struck with this whole idea of hope or grief, as you say. This sounds like a very interesting play that you mentioned. Grief is the thing with feathers. But I think the human race wouldn't exist if it wasn't for hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Author Sudeep Sen.
Something from Shadeep. Hello, Shadeep. This also reminds me of...
Yeah, but they can't. We can't hear them. Also, this reminds me of Muse. Who's Muse? I'm not familiar with their work.
Is this Muloch, the Eastern European poet?
Well, it's hard to.
I think we're going through slightly too many layers.
I know.
Shadeep, email us both tonight, and we'll have a chat about it.
They can hear us. Thanks.
Yeah, they can hear us. I hope so.
That we're not just talking to ourselves, that there are people who are actually listening. Oh, there is Sudeep again. Hi there. Yes, hi, Sudeep. Yeah. I'm sorry. This is interesting, and actually, in a way, theatrical as well. That there is this sort of communication across space, even if it's virtual space, and then you know, it's like in a real space. There is a time that you devote to something getting across, because it needs to fill the space, and that's how you have pauses and things. And so this is so much similar to that, you know. Yes, Savita Boral. Sir, what is your say in deep voicing the voiceless? Theatre plays an important role than fiction. I'm not sure I understand.
No,
Michael, do you want to take that?
I'm not sure I understand it either, but well, I mean, the question of giving voice to the voiceless has become quite a big
Yeah.
uh,
May-
debate around
Yeah.
theatre, which may be what Savita is
Yeah,
asking.
maybe Savita is talking about the reverse, that
Yeah.
by appropriating the voice of the voiceless, you're devoicing them. I hope I'm right in that. I think, yes, when we represent a voice, it comes with a huge responsibility, and I don't think we're doing that. I don't think when we are telling our stories, we cannot grandstand and say that we're giving voice to the voiceless, because we'll end up doing exactly what Savita is saying, is that then you're devoicing them, because you're appropriating that. Long ago, I wrote a play called Tara, and the entire thing, it's about the loss of a limb to the girl, and the entire story is set through the perspective of the boy, the twin brother, and how he has appropriated Tara's story by writing about it. And it ends with him saying, "Forgive me, Tara, forgive me for making it my tragedy." So I think now that I've understood what Savita Boral's saying, it's a very, very important and a very political question that she has raised, is that are we unknowingly doing that? Like, for example, if I write about women, right, and most of my protagonists are women, is there a danger that I am? Well, I would say no. I am quite confident in saying that may not be the case, because I don't I think as long as you invest your characters with real feelings and agency, that they have something to do in your story, you're not devoicing. The minute you portray them as victims, the minute you portray them as helpless or hopeless, then yes, I think you are devoicing them. Michael, feel free to disagree if you want to.
Well, there's been, I don't know, this idea of giving voice for a long time, really since sort of early feminism, and it's been a very big thing, particularly in applied theatre and theatre for development, but increasingly in mainstream theatre too, that somehow you give voice. And I think that is dangerous for the reasons you're saying, Mahesh, that, well, who gives?
That's right.
Have you got, because you suddenly got a voice and you give it to
Exactly.
somebody
So
you
it
don't
comes
even
from
know. It's
feeling entitled that you give, right?
so,
So you have the agency, you're
yeah.
controlling agency there, right?
But I think it's oddly related to what we were saying earlier about the need to devolve your power, which you necessarily have as a writer or director, just what
Absolutely,
the role is.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
and this allows me to stick another picture or two up, because it's always
There's
nice
another
to
question
look
from
at something.
Raja, but
Yeah, well,
after we
hang
see
on,
your,
let me do this first. Well, where is it? Oh, yes, here. There was a play which we did in Palestine called "This Flesh Is Mine," and um, with this play, it was adapted from the Iliad. There was a writer, Brian Wooland, adapted it, and we felt that there was a really interesting kind of overlap between what had happened, what was happening in the Middle East, and this ancient myth of a kind of atavistic cycle of violence. But once it had been written, we went into very, very dialogic rehearsals, and we went to Palestine with 3 British actors, and then there were 3 Palestinian actors, and we just had to be open about it and say, look, this is how far we've got. You tell us what's wrong about it. And there were all sorts of things which came up, and it was fantastic, actually. Like, there was a line about, I don't want to be in a refugee camp, and the actress who was given that line said, there's no way I'm saying that. My mother was born in the refugee camp. I was born in the refugee camp. The transience, the impermanence is part of the point of our identity. We have to acknowledge the value of the life in the refugee camp in order to acknowledge our Palestinianness. Oh, yes, we see. It's just to do with being open and democratic and all those things which theatre actually allows us to be, because it's a collaborative art form. So of course we weren't giving voice to that actress. She had one of her own. What we did have was a space where that voice could be heard. And that's an important responsibility to take. But that's very, very different from saying, okay, yeah, we're really important and we can give something there. Okay, there's another question here for
you. So go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to ask Michael Walling that besides language being a challenge when working in a different cultural space, what are his experiences in dealing with local customs in such spaces? Did the customs pose as a challenge or a scope for enrichment? Well, both is the answer, Raja. And I think the anecdote I just told is an example of scope for enrichment in discovering something about how people in a different space live. And the same absolutely happened with the production of The Tempest that Mahesh and I worked on together. The same happened with reorientations. Yes, of course, there are always challenges when you're out of your comfort zone. But I think that's in a way why I do it. Being discomforted is creative. I like when I'm nonplussed by something. I think it's very, very useful to be challenged because it means you have to think of a response which you wouldn't have thought of without the challenge. Yes, it does pose as a challenge, but the fact that it's a challenge makes it a scope for enrichment, I think is my answer. Mahesh, does that reflect your international?
Absolutely. Because I remember this was 20 years ago, maybe. I'd been to Japan on an invitation from the Japan Foundation, and they'd arranged to do a production of my play and a condensed version. And it was a Buto performance. So there was a translation already. It was more, the language was more dance.
Yeah.
But when I saw it, there were these very intense movements and, holding it. And there was very little verbiage. There were hardly any words spoken. There was music. And I was just wondering how it's so abstract. I mean, why did they even say that they want my play? They could have done this without the play, right? But when the question and answer came about, at one point I thought this wasn't my play, that this was like a curtain raiser, and then the play, and then I realized that as the translator began translating the questions, I was amazed at how much this was Final Solutions, a play. So what they'd done was they removed all the words of the chorus and converted that into these very intense movements. And what obviously the context was removed completely, but the questions, it was so clear that they got the insider and the outsider, the theme of the play, and that was what was explored. And there were some very, very interesting questions that came out of that. So in that sense, yes, I was nonplussed initially, but I think it was a great learning experience because it really made me think about my play as to what is coming across if I just remove the words, right? Is there anything left at all? And I think if there's nothing left, then, it has no soul. It is completely soulless because you create the words to embody a soul. And if that's absent, then the words are just could be, beautiful rhetoric or nonsense or whatever. So it really made me think about what is my play really about. And you're absolutely right. I agree with you that it's these moments of not knowing and being able to move on and want to know. I mean, that's where you create, actually, because you can't create from something that you already know. There's nothing to create then. It has to be in space.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're talking about in relation to the text, I guess it's what Peter Brook calls the pre-verbal, isn't it? The sense that there is something inside, I guess almost like Neil's hope that's there and which is necessary in order to bring the verbal into being. And that's something which you have to do as a writer, or an actor improvising has to do, is to access something pre-verbal in order to bring out the text. And then if you're an actor working on a text, the challenge is to work backwards from that to discover the pre-verbal.
Exactly.
It won't necessarily be the same.
Exactly.
But if all you're doing is saying these words, then there's no truth to it. I mean, words are only, there to help us to get towards something which is infinitely more profound. Which is why, so much good theatre is actually not spoken. There are moments of movement, there are moments of silence.
Right.
It's so important.
Michael, I'm amazed you said that, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Right? These mornings I've joined this amazing workshop by a Kodiyatam master, Sri Venuji. He is the foremost master of Kodiyatam, which is like the oldest theatrical, and in this today's session, we were looking at the rasa of heroism, and he chose Ravana lifting Kailash mountain. Right now, the exercise was he made us stand and he said, you have to look at the mountain, right? And you have to look at different portions of the mountain, and you see lions, you see snakes, you see elephants, and so on and so forth. And one of the students said, do we respond to what we see? He's saying, no, just look, right? You imagine, and it will show in your eyes. What you're seeing will show, right? And I think it's such a powerful and one of the world's oldest theatrical traditions, which is still living. And it talks about that. This is beyond words. It's beyond movement. It's beyond music. That all that is created for us to understand the inner world.
And this, of course, relates to Sunil's question from earlier, doesn't it, about observation? It's actually the looking is one of the most important things that we do as an artist. Like the Zen masters, when they will look at the paper for ages, and then they take the brush and they do that.
Yes. Yeah.
And this truly extraordinary energy is there on the paper, and you can't say, well, that's about this, or that's about that.
Yeah.
It's something immensely pure and immediate, because it's coming from that inward observation, and that is imagination, it's spirit, and I think it's hope. It's all of those things.
Yeah.
There's a question again from Raja. And Shadeep has sent the quotation. We should read this out so that people know what he was talking about. It is from Milosh. My generation was lost, cities too, and nations, but all this a little later. Meanwhile, in the window, the swallow.
That is beautiful. Oh my God. Thank you, Sudhi. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now I'm going to read up on that author. That is so beautiful. And remember, this morning on our email, we were talking about specifics leading to, and somehow we just began on the politics and the environment,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
got to the specifics. But it's that swallow in the window, which is the most important thing.
yeah.
I think, and that's hope. That is the hope with feathers.
Yes, that's brilliant. Yes, yes, it is. And of course, it's living and immediate and present, and therefore theatre and not another art form. You know, it's the immediacy of it that's being talked of in the poem,
Absolutely.
and that is so precise. And you know, that's why theatre won't die. You know, it's because it is the swallow in the window. It's our need to be so emotionally, physically present with something that is another natural body in the same space. And we'll find our way back to that. This relates well, actually, to Raj's
Yeah,
next
yeah,
question.
absolutely.
A local custom like Namaste became global during the pandemic. Can customs retain their influence beyond such periods of necessity, probably through incorporation into artistic forms? I think you answering your own question there, really. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the gesture, and this is something which I use a lot in my rehearsals and in my teaching are the archetypal and psychological gestures of Michael Chekhov. That there's something about a gesture which is just universal. That no matter how cultural it may seem, there is a whole history, the history of humanity coming forward in the gesture, whether it's a namaste or a handshake or whether you're rubbing noses. It's a very tactile way of acknowledging someone's presence, and I think yes, it could come out of necessity, but I think gestures by their nature are fairly universal.
Yeah, and you know, the namaste, yes, of course it's culturally specific, but um, you know, the moment I do that, people know that I'm acknowledging something in them. Uh, I don't have to have it explained to me. You know, I always knew before anyone told me that it was acknowledging the God in me, that that's what people were doing. It because you know, this is more, gestural language is purer than language, isn't it?
Yes,
You
yes,
know,
I agree.
I mean, like you said, rubbing noses. You know, it's wonderful when you meet Mari and you press noses together and you breathe. The sense of sharing the same breath is so potent when you do it. You don't need anyone to explain it to you. Um, and and to give us sort of circularity to the conversation, isn't that what we've been missing? You know, sharing breath in the same space, with this respiratory disease, and at the same time this sort of other plague that's been all over the world. I can't breathe. You know, the destruction of life, the destruction of breath, and let's find our way back to that gesture of just letting breath into the body and knowing that there's another body doing exactly the same thing. That's where we find our common humanity, isn't that?
Well, that's great. I don't know whether we've overshot. If there are, Ramanjit, do you want to honor us with your presence? Hello, I just love it when it opens with your smile,
Thanks, Mahesh. You're always very kind. And what a stimulating discussion. I mean, we discussed from, both of you discussed from uh, the times bringing out the audience looking at not a finished product and more at the process and the unfinished, the beauty of the unfinished, the beauty of the imperfection or
Mm.
not being perfectly there. What is that moment? It's almost like audience participating in the process itself, which is still moving or happening. And then of course hierarchy of our, how do we look at hierarchy during our times? And then of course you know starting from local, moving on to global. But Mahesh, what you said really is going to stay with me, that, we're going to source things within 5 kilometer radius and look at the arts creating a micro ecosystem. And from there, just because we're interacting with each other globally, that's what makes our local peace, local language, local everything global, local action, what Raja just talked about. And it's been stimulating and on many many levels. I wish it could go on. I wish you could share more work and more pictures, and why not, we could meet again and structure that kind of another session. I'm sure both of you thoroughly enjoyed. Would you like to say something before we wind up the session to the audience?
Oh, well, thank you all for coming. And I'm sorry we can't see you and we can't hear you, but we've been very aware of your presence, and thank you all so much for listening to.
Yeah, well, thank you for the questions. From Mr. Bhandari to Savita, Raja, Sudeep. I think that this kind of conversation was invaluable.
And Anjum Katyal has also, who's been a catalyst in making this happen, has also been complimenting quite a lot. So Anjum has been watching too. And there's been a lot of audience. And thank you so much. But also what Mahesh was sharing, Michael Chekhov's Four Brothers of Art, that gives me an opportunity to share with the audience that Mahesh is a guest faculty at the Creative Arts Academy, and he has just finished his first batch of the script writing course, where I thoroughly enjoyed the pieces that are coming up. And Michael, if he takes a second batch or the advanced course, we may have some plays coming up from the students of Mahesh, and we can all read them together. But what is coming up is the summer workshop. There are many, of course, but Mahesh is giving a summer workshop on acting, uh, based on the theory of Michael Chekhov's Four Brothers of Art, which is the feeling of the ease, feeling of the form, feeling of the beauty, and feeling of the whole, which I think are great tools for any actor. So if you're listening in, do check out the links and the proper dates, which is from 17th to 30th May. And I think it will be very beneficial for the actors who are starting out, or even the ones who are looking forward to honing their skills. So looking forward to that, looking forward to, continuing this feeling of hope, which I feel is our inborn instinct. The very instinct of survival keeps our hope alive. And that's what we need to look forward to. I would again say that stay safe, stay healthy, take care of yourself, and keep creating and keep smiling to keep all the negative things away. So thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for Mahesh for being here. And we'll see you both again. And Michael, looking forward to collaborating with you too in near future.
Thanks. I want to thank Ramanjit, of course, and Anjum. This wouldn't have happened without you sort of reaching out. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank Abanti, who has been
Yes.
a wonderful assistant. And of course, she is part of your, creative academy, but you're lucky to have such a good team. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
There's been Ruhani, Kunjika, Umang, everyone working behind the scenes. So thank you, team. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to the audience once again. Good
Yes.
night. Stay well.